Okay, this is a lesson on the United States Civil Rights era of the 1960s. As you can see here, there's three different areas that I'd like to focus on for us. The civil rights struggle, of course, really goes back to the United States Civil War in the 1860s. However, that effort fell apart during Reconstruction and the Jim Crow laws that we'll speak about in a moment. So the struggle had to begin again in really the 50s and then 60s. And there was three major elements to it to try to handle discrimination against blacks in public facilities, not just voting, but simply eating in a restaurant or going to separate schools, all of this. And that was dealt with the 1964 Civil Rights Act. The other issue, of course, was voting rights. Blacks had been kept away from polls with poll fees and taxes where they had to pay to vote or they had to be able to read the Constitution. They would use other techniques and intimidation to prevent them from voting. The final issue Martin Luther King will be dealing with is the economic independence. He felt that even if you have discrimination eliminated and voting rights, you still need to have money to be able to use your freedom. And he started a Poor People's Campaign in 1968, which Martin Luther King unfortunately was not able to finish because he was assassinated in April of that year. So let's take a look at how the situation was for blacks during the 50s and for many years before. You can see here the sign saying "Help Wanted, White Only," and you can also see this black gentleman here having to drink from a separate drinking fountain. The white drinking fountain, of course, was better quality, and he was unable to use it without being fined or even perhaps arrested. And basically, that's an illustration of what you see here is the Jim Crow laws. Supreme Court got involved also. This is a case called Plessy versus Ferguson, 1896. The Supreme Court said that separate but equal facilities was legal, and they allowed that to happen. So Supreme Court set a precedent there. Another issue which came up was, even before Martin Luther King, was the use of the courts by black lawyers from the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. They figured they could use the courts to try to strike down discriminatory and racist laws. And the story here is little Linda Brown in Topeka, Kansas wanted to go to school at a local school near her, which happened to be a white school. And not surprisingly, the principal didn't allow her to attend because that was against the law. This is what a typical black school would have looked like rather than a nice brick building. And the result of this case, which was brought to the courts, it made its way all the way up to the Supreme Court, and in 1954 they chose in the Brown versus the Board of Education case that racially segregated schools violated the student's 14th Amendment, which means that they have equal rights. A black student has equal rights to a white student for public education. So that case was really a big one because it allowed the integration of schools where formerly they could not do that. The big issue here after that is the Montgomery, Alabama bus boycott in 1955. Here is Rosa Parks. I'm sure you're familiar with the story where she refused to give up her seat to a white man, which was required under law in Montgomery. She was arrested knowing full well she would be, and also that she would get the support of the black community. Martin Luther King came along the scene here and organized a bus boycott so that the blacks said, okay, if we're not going to be able to sit where we want on a bus, we are going to boycott the buses. We know we're the ones that ride them, so we're going to walk to work, as you can see here in this photo. We'll be taking taxis, any other method besides the buses, and as you can see here, this white woman is the only one on the bus. So for about a year, they boycotted the buses while the legality of segregated busing made its way into the courts. And at the end of the day, it was decided that by the courts that segregated busing also violated people's constitutional rights. And this is really the big opening play by Martin Luther King. He decided to use a different technique rather than try to use violence or anything like that. He decided to emulate Mahatma Gandhi from India. He had used nonviolence and non-cooperation to get rid of the British colonial power in India. So Martin Luther King felt that if I use the same kind of techniques here, non-cooperation, non-violent resistance, such as a bus boycott, I might be able to get results for my people. And so yes, this also worked. This issue made its way to the courts, and the courts outlawed segregated busing in Alabama. Okay. Martin Luther King also went on to form, as you see here, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference to continue to try to fight for the rights that we mentioned here, 1964 Act, the Voting Rights Act, and later on the idea of economic independence. So you can see Martin here leading the bus boycott, a young man, 26 years of age, and here's Coretta Scott King. That's his wife. The next area was taking the fight to the schools, and we'll finish here. Many schools, as you saw, were segregated, and even after the Supreme Court decided to integrate schools, many of the whites resisted. And one place where they resisted was at Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas. And you can see here the African-American student attempting to go to school being harassed by the white students. Long story short, the governor of Arkansas, Orville Faubus, resisted this. He didn't want blacks going to school there. He used the Arkansas National Guard to keep the students out. President Eisenhower reluctantly got involved because he realized that it was now a federal issue when the Supreme Court had made that decision. So in order to enforce the federal law, President Eisenhower actually sent in American federal troops to escort blacks into the school and made it so that they could go to class and desegregate Little Rock, Arkansas High School, Central High School.